Diana, thank you. Let me unmute you. I know you've been on one other time, and I know I've interviewed before, and so it's always a pleasure seeing you and talking to you. And you're up there in that beautiful area of New England. I think it was New Hampshire, if I'm not mistaken, but correct me if I'm wrong. So you guys got a book. You and Rob Wolf put together a wonderful book. I've had the opportunity to read the pre-release version of it. I thought it was excellent. I think you guys did a really, really good job of outlining the argument. Many of the arguments I've been making, where I was very happy to see that those made it, those are very well reflected in the book. And I think we're on the same page for much of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a treatise to eat a carnivore diet, but it does talk about, the very important role of meat in our diet and the potentially huge role that regenerative agriculture has in sort of righting some of the environmental wrongs. And so, and then the book, and then I don't know about when the movie's coming up, that also looks awesome. So let me just start right now. Tell us where we can buy the book, when it comes out. Tell us a little bit about the book, and then I want to get into specifics and answer questions that the members may have. So
sure. And we do mention carnivore in there as a great therapy that needs to be explored. We also just felt though that, gosh, we have so many haters already. If we were pushing carnivore as like, the case for better meat, it would just, that would be just one more reason for everyone to hate us, because we've already got, I'm actually getting like death threats from regenerative farmers who are so angry with me because I'm saying that, folks that can't access regenerative only meat should actually just buy meat. People who don't have enough money or whatever access to that grass-fed farmer, if they want to give their kids a leg up in life, they should feed them beef. And, I am the devil for that. It's even worse than the vegans, honestly.
Yeah. And I am a little, quite honestly, very disappointed to hear that, because when I read that, I was really, quite honestly, I was kind of surprised to see that, because everybody sort of is like, oh, everybody has to eat regenerative meat. And I've been saying, hey man, if you can't afford it, it's still better. Get the stuff that you can afford at the grocery store.
Totally. I mean, it's still better environmentally than chicken or pork. It's or Twinkies or what beans and rice. It's better. Beef is more nutrient dense, like about 30% more nutrient dense than chicken. And ethically, these cattle are not like in cages when they're in a feedlot. They spend most of their life on grass. And even when they're finished on a feedlot, most of their diet comes from food we can't eat, on land we can't grow crops on, and just are amazing magical upcyclers of nutrient poor food. So, as a clinician, I could never say, or a doctor could never say to a patient, only eat organic vegetables or don't eat vegetables, right? And it's the same thing, like broccoli is still healthy for you if you can't afford organic broccoli, right? And it's the same thing with beef. And wow, I'm just really getting it. And so far, the vegans haven't really been giving me too much problem. I am meeting with the chief of police. Actually, I was just texting with him to talk about security because I'm just nervous, right? I mean, I live on a farm that's, 5 minutes on Google, they could figure out where I live, and I have kids, and it could be bad. But so far right now, the death threats are coming from this one regenerative farmer in particular. That's just, I mean, he's calling Rob and I racist. He's just, it's really disappointing and upsetting. And, I mean, I have been talking about social justice issues and food equity and like all of this stuff for so long. I make nothing at any of this, and I really care. And, but I'm just, an evil, apparently all you need to do to be an expert is to be photogenic and white is what I'm being told. So I guess that's a compliment, right? That I'm photogenic.
I don't know. I mean, I would argue I'm not particularly photogenic, but, and I don't know, you can debate whether I'm successful or not, but I mean, to me, that's really, really sad and shocking, because I mean, if anybody reads the whole book and doesn't come away with the fact that we should be supporting regenerative agriculture, then they have their reading comprehension skills are bad. What I've said, and I think you echoed, it says, when it comes to human health, we do not yet have solid data we can hang our hat on that says, eating grass-finished or regeneratively produced beef is tremendously better than not. And until that data is available, and I hope it is available, quite honestly, I hope when the studies are done, it shows that regenerative meat is clearly better for human health. Thus far, those studies have not been done. Thus far, I have not had any reason to sort of make that argument. And I'm happy to make that argument, and I hope that's the argument that we can make.
Right.
But for now, I mean, I think we have to talk with the truth, and we have to support where
Yeah.
the data comes
Yeah.
from. And I think it's really, really, you know, it's a vegan-like agenda when you start doing that. For the environmental reasons, I'm 100% behind regenerative agriculture. I think we need to do that. I think even if you just count climate change and greenhouse gases, it is still a win for the environment with biodiversity, restoration of our soils. And so it is so incredibly important. And you guys make a wonderful, wonderful argument in that book. And I hope everybody reads that with an open mind. And they look at that part where, you know, because when I read that part, I said, they're going to get a lot of shit for this, because I've been getting a lot of shit for it. I've been saying the same thing for years now. And, you know, I know there's people that want to paint this narrative that, oh, if you eat meat that is not raised in a certain way, you are eating equivalent of poison, which I think is just, I think is unhelpful. And I think it's harmful.
Well, and I think, you know, from a, you know, if we're talking about food equity, right, there's only been one randomized controlled trial looking at kids who are food insecure and like meat versus less meat. And so there's only one study was done in Kenya. And so one group of kids got a meat supplement, one group got extra calories, and one group got a dairy supplement. And the meat group outperformed all the other groups in terms of academics, physically and behaviorally. And interestingly, the next best group was not the dairy group, it was the over-calorie group. And I think that might have to do with the fact that dairy blocks iron absorption. So, you know, and what they're doing in a lot of countries in Africa is, because meat's expensive, they're just putting extra milk on the lunch trays of these kids. And I actually think that that's a big problem. But then when we look at, you know, Meatless Mondays, and we're highly critical of them in the book and the film, you know, here is a population where 70% of the kids are low income in New York City public schools, 10% are homeless. We have no data at all to prove that taking meat away from these kids, when this might be either their only meal or their most nutrient dense meal of the day, we have no data showing that this is actually going to benefit them to like swap out grilled cheese in exchange for the burger, right? And there's no evidence this is going to make any dent in the environment either. And meanwhile, this program gets to put propaganda all over the schools, teaching these kids from kindergarten to 12th grade that meat is unhealthy, meat is bad, you shouldn't be eating meat. And that's in the schools like every day of the week. It's not just up on Meatless Mondays days. And so I've got a huge problem with this sort of virtue signaling that's going on with, you know, the urge to cut down on meat, because there's a lot of people that just, you know, when we talk about privilege, there's a lot of people that don't have the privilege to push away a nutrient dense food, to, you know, go to a CVS and get their B12 supplements and, you know, all the other things you need to do to try to maximize a vegan type diet. So I'm just all fired up about that anyway.
Before we get too far into this, I really want you to talk about where we can get the book, because I know this stuff gets pushed to the end and no one listens to it. So I want you to do it right now, because I want you guys to have great sales on this. So where do we buy the book? When's it coming out? So on and so forth.
We're trying to push most of the book sales through Amazon, because they're the most powerful bookseller. And we're actually, so if they go to the website, sacredcow.info/book, and they take a screenshot of their receipt from any online seller, but we're hoping for Amazon the most. We are going to give folks about $200 worth of free stuff. So I wrote a meat cookbook called Simply Meat. We're giving away 4.5 hours of footage that didn't make it into the film. So 7 interviews that didn't make it into the film. Rob has a flavor guide. We've got discounts to meat companies. And when the film is ready, they will get an exclusive sneak preview link to the film. So the film is going to be done. It's in post-production right now. So we're fixing color and sound and everything. But anyone who pre-orders the book, so they have to submit the receipt in a week from now, because the book comes out on Tuesday, will get a link when the film is ready. So probably the first week of August, late July, early August. And I think some folks might know by now, but Nick Offerman is our narrator, and he's been pushing the film, and it's just like he's the best partner, because not only is he like recognizable by young people, and his character Ron Swanson is, you know, I'll take all the meat, but he actually is so pro regenerative ag and so pro like the working guy, and so down to earth, and has been messaging me like every day, like, how can I help you? What can I do? And so it's just been like amazing to have him on board as a partner.
Yeah, I was tickled when I saw him because he's kind of our sort of a little bit of a cultural hero, even though it's a fictitious character from Parks and Recs.
Oh,
But I
someone
mean,
asked what's it called? It's called Sacred Cow. The
right,
book
yeah,
and film
yeah.
are called Sacred Cow. And we don't, after this sneak preview release, I'm not 100% sure where the film is going to be. It was, I'll give you a little background. It was sitting on the desk of the folks at Netflix Originals. I flew out and I met with them in January. They were very excited about the idea of it. One of the producers on the film actually works on Chef's Table, which is a Netflix original program. And she's been helping me. She actually lives on a regenerative farm in Virginia. And we met with Netflix, and they decided to pass as a Netflix original, which would have been really cool because it would have been like a Netflix branded film. And then it was on the desk, thanks to Nick, of the folks at Amazon, to be like an Amazon backed film. They just passed. Unfortunately, I've been reading that a lot of these online streamers are passing on controversial films. They're just silencing them. So there's still an opportunity to license them. Like The Magic Pill was on Netflix, licensed to Netflix, but it wasn't like a Netflix original. So I can still go down that route, but I was excited at the idea of it being a Netflix original. Just like a little yay to all the other films that are out there that have the opposite messaging. So anyway, I'm gonna have it. I'm gonna own the rights to it for the time being until I then go license it out to the major streaming. So it'll probably be available in the fall, like on the major SVODs.
Yeah, and let me ask you, how did you convince Nick Offerman to do this? I mean, did you just out of the blue pick him up and say, hey, I know you're the meat guy, but in real life, I didn't know what his beliefs were. I mean, he could have been a damn vegan for all I know.
Yeah.
How did that go?
So actually, we were out in England last year filming with a sheep farmer named James Rebanks, who's awesome. He talks a lot about rural culture and like rural versus urban, and how farmers have been just assumed to be dummies, right? And that these teachers come in from outside of the community and try to teach these kids that being a banker is the way to go, not being a farmer. And so he talks a lot about farming culture and the importance of it. Anyway, he was telling me that Nick Offerman was gonna come the day after I was leaving, because they're really good friends, and Nick was gonna do some writing out there and hang out in James's barn. And I was like, oh, that's an odd combo. And then I found out that Nick was actually the executive producer on a film about Wendell Berry called Look and See. And Wendell Berry is like this agrarian writer who wrote several amazing books, but The Unsettling of America, Culture and Agriculture is just was the most transformative book for us to become farmers, basically. And Nick actually just read the audio versions of those. So they're going to be read by Nick Offerman. So he loves Wendell Berry. And then when he learned, and I'm a furniture maker, he owns a wood shop. It's called Offerman Wood Shop. And so I sent him some pictures of some of the furniture that I made, including some like pretty badass dovetails that I can do without machines. And so that very much impressed him. And now he's 100% Team Diana.
It's great to hear. I mean, and I think that's an exciting first step because, like I said, I've seen now, I mean, this is how it builds, but I've got some, NFL professional athletes that are doing carnivore now, putting that message out and actually speaking about it, not afraid to speak about it. If we can start getting celebrities, other influencer, and that's the reality. I mean, Beyonce sells a diet, and whoever has the millions upon millions of followers are going to have the biggest impacts. And we as people that maybe even know more, trying our best, we're never going to reach that audience. So if we can get more of these big influencer celebrities, politicians, whatever, to support regenerative agriculture. I mean, instead of the silly let's no one eat meat vegan diet garbage, which is, as you know and I know, is based on a lot of misinformation. That is a huge win, and I think we should be able to. We certainly, I think that can happen, and hopefully some more celebrities will stand up and sort of say, hey, I'm for meat, but I'm also for better meat, as you make a very eloquent argument in your book. So let's talk about we've talked about the fact that, hey, you're not going to die if you can't afford to eat the highest end regenerative meat. And as Stephen Zwick, who's in the audience right here, and I know you're familiar with Stephen, has said that, it's not even grass finished versus grain finished, because grass finishing can mean a whole lot of things. It can mean, like, I drove across Arizona and I see a bunch of cows sitting in the fields, and I'm like, oh, well, that's really cool. But they're not clustered. They're just running around, eating whatever they want. They're likely degrading the land, even though they're grass. Maybe they might be grass finished. It's how we manage those guys. But let's start to make the case for why should we support regenerative agriculture outside of the health argument, which I think is iffy at best, but hopefully it'll turn out to be true. But why should we support regenerative agriculture?
Yeah, and another just kind of piece of complexity and nuance to this is one of the ranches that we visited in the film in Chihuahua. So this guy is part of a collective of ranchers in the Chihuahua state of Mexico, so it's just south of Texas, that are regenerating 1 million acres of degraded desert back into grasslands. That's what it was. But he actually finishes on feedlots. So it's not like feedlot beef bad, grass-fed good, because if we alienate all the ranchers that are, most beef, all beef starts on grass and can be grazed regeneratively before it goes to a feedlot. This guy at Rancha Las Damas is Alejandro Carrillo is his name. It just economically makes more sense for him to finish his cattle at a feedlot, but he can still do regenerative practices as they're in the calf cow and stocker phase at his ranch. So I just wanted to kind of bring it up that it's like there's so many levels of gray in between, like, beef and beef, right? So I just wanted to kind of bring that part up. But when we manage these cattle properly, so when we're moving them frequently and not just putting them on one paddock for the entire season, we actually give the grass that they just grazed a chance to rest. And so they're in a small paddock. They're eating as quickly as they can because they're going to be moving and they're super hungry. They move off and start on the new patch of grass. The grass that they were just on then gets a chance to not get overgrazed. The manure gets to, fully get incorporated down. And the grass then is sending all the carbon down to the microorganisms in the soil, to the fungal networks in the soil that are then exchanging the carbon that they're eating in exchange for nutrients that the grass needs. And some of this carbon actually gets sequestered in the soil during this process. And when we have more carbon in the soil, that attracts water molecules. And so we can actually hold more water. So that's just happening like in the soil, but then, through not plowing and having a great diversity of different types of forage and wildflowers and all kinds of things in the pastures, then we can attract more pollinators, more, different types of insects. We can have better bird populations. This guy in Mexico is actually working with a ton of bird organizations because there's all these endangered birds that are now stopping on their migratory pattern stopping at his ranch because there's more streams. He's getting the same amount. He gets about 10.5 inches of rain a year, which is nothing. And it's the same as all the rest of the dry, barren desert all around him. But when you get to his ranch, it's this complete oasis. And that's 100% from him just using cattle. Their hoof action actually breaks up the hard pan and allows the water to penetrate in. There's just so many benefits.
Did you talk to Alan? Are you familiar with Alan Williams? Was he in the film?
Yeah, we interviewed him. Yep.
Yeah, I interviewed him, and I thought he was one of the more, one of the frustrations I've had with this is, yes, we know regenerative agriculture can improve the biodiversity of the land. Yes, we know it can become a net carbon sink. I mean, that's been demonstrated, but always the counterpoint is it's not scalable. There's not enough land. And Alan, I thought, made a pretty compelling case. It says, yes, it is scalable. Yes, we do have the land. Yes, we can feed everybody at least the same amount of meat we're eating right now in a regenerative scenario, and perhaps even more. And I think that is a message that has to get out there, because the naysayers, what they're doing is they're calling grass finished beef what I see driving across Arizona. Cows diversely spread apart, saying that's what grass-fed beef is, and that's how much land you have to use it, where it discounts the fact that the yield per acre, the productivity, particularly when you run a vertically stacked enterprise where you got not only cows, but you got chickens and sheep and goats and pigs and geese or whatever also on that same patch of grass. And so talk to us about scalability.
Mm-hmm.
What did you learn about? Is this a viable solution for a massive population for feeding? Can we feed all 330 million Americans regeneratively raised beef? Is that a pipe dream, or is that realistically possible?
Yeah. So in the film, we don't go into numbers because it's easy to refute, right? I mean, we're going off of hearsay from, Alan Williams reports this, Joel Salatin reports this, like Joel Salatin says we're doing 4 times a county average, but that doesn't necessarily mean that someone in Nevada is going to do 4 times a county average. It really all just depends. But the fact is, we don't have a food production problem already. We're overproducing human feed right now and creating a sick population. So the goal should not be, let's create more food to create more sick people. The goal should be, let's create more nutrition to heal people. So we don't have a food production problem. Anyone who's hungry or underfed, it's a political problem and a distribution problem. It has nothing to do with food production. So what we need to do is make sure that whatever food production system we're talking about is something that we can come back 1,000 years from now and it's still going to be happening. And the problem with industrial agriculture and extractive methods that are reliant on fossil fuels and other chemicals, that is not sustainable. That is, destroying topsoil and ruining ecosystems. And it's just not something that is going to be sustainable long term. So regenerative agriculture is the only way forward. We absolutely have to work with systems that are going to increase topsoil, to increase ecofunction health. We need pollinators. We're destroying them right now. We have to have a system that works with nature. So that's just, one piece of it. I looked at Alan's numbers. I talked to Joel Salatin. I talked to a few other people and kind of did, in the book, I walk through some numbers. And so if we look at even a modest 30% increase with regenerative ag, so that's really, really conservative. And we look at the CRP program. So this is a conservation program that the government is paying farmers not to graze their land. So if we allow that to be grazable, so cattle can go and graze, after you harvest the wheat, cattle can go on. After you harvest corn, cattle, even for ethanol, cattle can go on and eat the corn stalks, and they can actually upcycle corn stalks, things that we can't eat, into meat. If we stop growing grain specifically for cattle, and if we look at all of the undergrazed or private property that's not being grazed right now and turn that into grazing land, it does look like we have more than enough land to grass finish. And it's not like we have to create land for all of the cattle to live their entire lives on grass. We just have to finish them on grass. So yes, it takes less land to finish on grain, but that system is just not a long-term sustainable system. It's inexpensive right now in America because we subsidize grain production. In most other places, it doesn't make sense economically to finish cattle on grain because it's just more expensive to do it that way. But so if it takes approximately 2.5 acres of land of regenerative compared to 1 acre of conventional, I would rather have 2.5 acres of regenerative agriculture to 1 acre of, conventional corn. And I would certainly rather eat, 1 pound of beef compared to 2.5 pounds of corn. So I think we have to look at things completely differently and think about, like, number one, what is the best food for humans? And then number two, how can we produce that in a nutrient dense way? In a sustainable way.
Yeah, and there's so many ways to go here. So one thing I think is part of the problem is who frames the argument. Right now, we have an argument that says calorie per calorie, we can produce more plant-based nutrition than we can, say, beef. Okay, and I think there's some validity to that statement. However, calories do not equate to nutrition.
Right.
And I think guys like Don Layman have done studies saying, let's look at nutrients. And so
Yeah.
talk to us about how we should be framing the arguments that make better sense for human health or environmental health or whatever one we want to look at.
Yeah, I mean, I even looked at the greenhouse gas footprint of diabetes, and I'm sure that, that would be interesting to you, right? So we've got Lancets, we've got all the gadgets, we've got amputations, all the plastic involved in dialysis. I mean, there's lost days of work because of obesity and other health related conditions associated with diabetes and obesity. So there's a huge cost to producing cheap food for humans that isn't considered in any of these arguments at all. And so we absolutely have to first off start with what is the healthiest foods for humans to be eating, what is the most, looking at evolutionary biology. I mean, that's why folks from, the paleo world are so behind all of this, because it just makes sense. You start with a nutrient dense diet, and then you figure out how to make it in the most sustainable way. But what's currently the dialogue is that folks like Walter Willett, who we actually have in the film, and other folks that are pushing this grain heavy diet, they're actually like, okay, let's look at this broken system. What is the most sustainable food? And then let's feed that to humans, right? It's completely backwards from where you and I are coming from, Sean, where we're looking at what's the healthiest food for humans and then how can that be produced in a better way. And so that's why we start in the film and in the book with the nutrition argument first. And again, that's why I think a lot of regenerative farmers are a little stressed out, because they're like, well, clearly my meat is the only meat that's good, and people should just necessarily eat less meat, when, the average American eats about 2 pounds of beef per person, 2 ounces of beef per person per day. That's not too much. And, the reality is we're eating way more, sugar, chicken, grains, vegetable oils, and drinking more alcohol. I mean, I don't hear anyone saying like drink like alcohol, when that's like a completely empty calorie that millions and millions of acres are in agriculture for. So we need to get back to, looking at nutrient dense food, and then, how to make that in a better way.
Yeah, I mean, I love the fact you say, what is the greenhouse gas footprint of diabetes? And I know, I've seen like healthcare industry US about 10%, which is clearly 5 times what the cattle greenhouse gas footprint is in the
Right.
US based on EPA data, which, I think that's probably credible. We have a lot of, let's start, because most of us, have kind of sort of said, the greenhouse gas argument just doesn't make much sense. I mean, it's life cycle assessment versus direct emissions. It's 2% versus 28% on, energy sector, transportation. It's not even close in the U.S. where I live and you live and most of us live, or other Western nations where it's going to be very similar. It's only these places where, the high greenhouse gas relative footprints are in places that don't have much industry, don't have much transport. They're basically third world countries where we get this. And those people obviously can't survive without, as you pointed out, animal agriculture. Their livelihood depends on, and their health depends upon that.
Yeah, and they might not have doctors or CVSs for hundreds of miles to go, get their B12 supplement and check their B12 status. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Sure, absolutely. And again, to propose a plant-based diet, and first of all, it implies privilege and wealth, and that's not the case for much of the world. So this can't be a worldwide argument. But let's talk about, I'm just going to throw water, because we often hear, the greenhouse gas argument. I think most of us are familiar with refuting it. If not, they can read your book. Water is another one we hear that, the common meme, and Stephen pointed out this in chat, there's a lot of memes out there. The vegan meme, they show a hamburger patty and then they show like 55 swimming pools. This is what it takes to make, exaggerating a little bit, but
55 swimming
not by much. I mean, 2,000 gallons to make a pound of beef.
Yeah.
Talk about water. Talk about why soil health is important for water. Why you said the only way forward is regenerative agriculture, and you kind of alluded to soil health. Let's unpack that a little more.
Yeah, so the water footprints are a really interesting thing, because it's not comparing apples to apples. So just like with the fossil fuels, and it's not just the methane emissions, but it's also looking at it in a cycle. I've got this poster behind me. I don't know if you guys can see this, but I've got this also on my website. But the idea that, you know, cattle are actually part of a carbon cycle, but they're also part of a water cycle too. So, but biogenic methane is very different than fossil fuel emissions, right? Which are a straight up, you know, add to the environment where cattle are part of a cycle. But with the water in particular, there's different types of water measurements that you can do. So there's green water, which is rain and the moisture that's already held in grass. And then there's blue water, which is like what you would put in a swimming pool, you know, what you would pump up from the ground or use in irrigation. And so when you're looking at even traditional cattle, 94% of the water footprint for typical cattle is green water. So that's water that's naturally occurring in the environment, rain that's coming down, or moisture that's in grass to begin with. With grass-fed beef, it's 97% green water. So when you want to compare like water waste, you need to be looking at blue water, which is, you know, water that's pumped up from aquifers. And when you look at the blue water footprint, even typical beef is better than avocados, walnuts, sugar, rice, many other crops that I don't hear being vilified. And beef is way more nutrient dense. And when they're managed well, cattle can actually improve the water holding capacity of the soil. So healthy soil is like a sponge that actually absorbs water. And in the film, we actually show Jason Roundtree doing a water demonstration where he has pasture, regenerative pasture, and then a cropping example. And he makes 2 inches of rainfall just from like a hose. And then he flips it over, and you can see that with 2 inches of rain, when he flips over the cropping example, it's dry on the bottom. And it's only about this thick, but no water actually made it down. And then when he flips over the grass version of the example, it's completely wet. So all of the roots and everything kind of holding that soil together allowed the water to penetrate in, where the cropping example just completely, everything just washed right off. And so that's what's happening in conventional cropping, is the water is actually just going, it's taking soil with it, and it's just going straight into waterways, and it's bringing with it all the chemicals and creating dead zones and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I always laugh when some people, when they negate the fact that the rain, I say, well, do you think the rain would still fall if the cow was there or not? And the answer is yes, the rain would still fall. And many people don't understand that the majority of water that cattle get comes from eating grass. I mean, most of the water they consume comes from eating the grass that contains that water. Grass has got a lot of water in it. And so that is something that I think most people are completely lost on. Let's talk about some of the other benefits of soil health. Why is soil health benefit outside of, you know, retention of water, which by the way reduces wildfires? What happens when we rebuild the soil?
Well, we can improve the carrying capacity of the land, so we can grow more food on it. So we're going to have denser, healthier forage and legumes for cattle to eat, and so we can produce way more food per acre on healthy soil than we can on, you know, poor soil. So we actually, I mean, we absolutely need to have healthy soil. It prevents, you know, with the water too, it can prevent flooding when you have water that can actually go down instead of just running off. So a lot of the flooding that we're seeing is from bad agriculture practices. And we actually have an example of that in the film too, where we see all this erosion that's happening from soil that has no roots in it. So it's just like sand. And when the water falls, it's not going straight down. So it just erodes all away. And so you can't grow food without soil. And we're currently just ruining all of the soil and turning everything into sand, which is going to make it so in the future, we can't grow any food there to begin with.
I like, you know, I have, you know, been guilty of this myself, because I've heard from many people, you know, we have 60 harvests left and the soil is going to run out. And you point out that number is basically pulled out of someone's ass. I mean, we don't really know. And I think that's, I mean, I was, you know, when I read it, I was like, wow, that's, you know, I didn't know that. So
yeah, I don't know if I used those words in the book, but yes.
No, you didn't. But I mean, you know,
but that's what happened. There was a woman from the United Nations at a conference, and she just said it. And everyone's like, oh, well, she said it, then we don't even need a citation. It's just like, that's fact. And so I think we just need to be very careful about, tracing things. And I did interview a woman from the United Nations for the film. Her interview didn't make it into the film, but she is one of the bonus videos that you can get if you pre-order the book. Anne Motet is her name. And she's the one who actually wrote the article on greenhouse gases that refutes the livestock's long shadow. So she's the one who pointed out we weren't looking at things properly. So she was at the same conference with Frank Mitloner when I was in Belgium. Anyhow, we just have to be really careful about that. I mean, everyone's just citing the Scientific American, which cites some woman pulling a number out of her ass, basically. But it is true. We are losing topsoil. We just don't know exactly what the number is, and we need to be careful about that.
Yeah, so it could be 10 years, it could be 500 years, we don't know. But I mean, clearly we need to continue to improve that. What was I gonna say there? I had something I thought was relevant, a real brilliant thing, and then it just left my brain. I guess I gotta go eat another steak to do that. Let's say, so we've got water balance, we've got greenhouse gases. What about the concern about, this is what I was going to add. This is what I was going to say. So Livestock's Long Shadow comes out 2006. That document is 14, almost 15 years old. There has been a lot of new science has come out, and then yet we are still deferring to this and using this, 14% of all, greenhouse gases are created by animal agriculture.
14.5, yeah. And
it was revised down from 18% until it wasn't a life cycle assessment, but
yeah.
it was. But what I see is, every single month it seems like they discover a new source of methane leaks, a new source of nitrous in the environment. And so that number has to be much lower, even if you take them at face value, because of all the other. And I mean, I think Stephen sort of taught me on the difference between a top-down analysis, what's in the atmosphere methane-wise, versus a bottom-up, what can we measure? We can take a cow, we can stick a gas mask on its mouth and see how much he belches out, and then multiply that by 1.2 billion cows or whatever it is, and say that's how much cows produce. But we can't do that for all these other things. There are probably things we don't even know how to measure yet. How much does a termite? How many termites are there in the world? I mean, Rob is showing like shellfish. I mean, so talk a little bit about what's happened in the last 15 years since Livestock's Long Shadow.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it's comparing biogenic, cyclical, natural cycles to extractive one-way streets, which is what we see with transportation and energy and those types of things. But yet we've seen in Sweden, the Green Party was saying that we need to shoot all the moose because they emit methane. And as Rob was saying, we got to get rid of all the mussels on the ocean floor because they emit methane. Rice actually emits tons of methane, but I don't hear rice-free Fridays, right? And nutritionally, my God, that, rice compared to beef, that's, and so they have noticed that there's a ton of leaks that happen from fracking. And even that the formula that they use to convert methane to CO2 equivalents might be off. So Oxford has been adjusting those numbers a little bit. So, but the reality is we don't have more ruminant animals in North America than we did before we got rid of the bison and all the other native ruminants that were here before. And so biogenic methane from ruminant animals is just not a concern. It shouldn't be a concern. And then there's that one study from PNAS that looked at what would happen to the US if we got rid of all the animals in our food system. Greenhouse gas emissions would only go down 2.6%, but we would have an increase in calories, which we don't need, an increase in carbs, which we don't need, and an increase in nutrient deficiencies. So it really would just be hugely detrimental to our entire population, the health of our population, if we got rid of animal products. And again, there's a lot of people that don't have the time or the privilege to push away meat and adopt a vegan lifestyle because it's just, it takes privilege, it takes time, it takes a lot of knowledge and understanding to try to plan this out properly. There's a lot of places in the world where women can't own land, but they can own livestock. And so, you know, there's all these places where you can't just like plow it up. So are we going to just make all of these people dependent on US grain subsidies? I mean, that's a really good way for the US to control governments and populations. It's what we're doing in Haiti right now. And so I see, you know, Silicon Valley's eyes light up when they have Impossible Burger and Beyond Burger because of intellectual property and patents and controlling food systems and controlling profits. And it's very, very dangerous to me.
Now, I can't remember if you cover this in detail in the book, and you do allude to the fact that these intellectual property, these patents for these processes to develop meat, these are going to be, if they are held up, and they can be held up, they're going to be exclusive to these companies that own them. And therefore, you're right, they are going to have tremendous control over the food supply, tremendous profit generated from, you know, being able to patent a type of food. We have, you know, obviously there's the you know, and I think we can all agree these plant-based faux meats that are basically canola oil and some sort of pea protein, or more or less, basically, is just not particularly good for human health. I would argue it's probably worse for the environment, certainly worse for the environment than a regeneratively raised animal. Yeah. But let's talk about the lab-grown meat, because there's people that are out there that are like, I'm not going to eat the plant-based stuff, but I'm going to line up to eat the lab-grown meat. And I really have some significant concerns about that, because, you know, I understand that protein doesn't come from the air. I mean, there actually is companies thinking about fixing nitrogen from the air with bacteria, and maybe they can. But from my understanding, the lab-grown meat, the stuff grown in the giant beer vats, you know, with the cell culture, the inputs are going to have to come, the protein inputs are going to have to come from somewhere, and it's most likely going to be monocropped soybeans, peas, legumes, and other things, which is just going to have the same effect. In fact, you're going to need more protein grown from grain and, you know, grain or peas or legumes than you would from what a cow can do, because they can convert, as you pointed out, 86% of their feed or food is not consumable by humans, and much of it is grass, and 60%, 50% of it's grass or more, depending on how they're raised.
Right.
Which is completely, you know, is upcycled. So can you touch on that?
Yeah, because the inputs for lab meat are going to directly compete with the land that we could be used for cropping, for vegetables and other healthy things that we could be eating. And so to me, it's the same as the idea of colonizing Mars. It's a fantasy. It's a high-tech fantasy that absolutely makes no sense from a logical perspective. When you think about all of the energy too it takes to run a lab, and what else grows really well in these perfect environments that grow tissues? Bacteria. So then what are you going to do? How many antibiotics are you going to need in order to stop the growth of pathogens? How much plastic are you going to need in order to grow this stuff? And so it's, I mean, it's not much different from Soylent Green and from, you know, just these sci-fi fantasies that, you know, you can't beat nature. And I think that, you know, a cow converting sunlight to protein basically through eating grass is the most efficient way to produce food and to increase ecosystem function. And there's nothing to me about lab meat or Beyond Meat or Impossible Burgers that are actually increasing ecosystem function in that process.
Yeah, that's a great concept. Why is it then, and I'm going to be cynical here, but I mean, you know, we see Silicon Valley lining up with millions and millions of dollars pumped into these startups for this stuff. Are they doing it because they are altruistic and they want to save the environment? What do you think the motivation is for that influx of money?
I think some of them truly believe that they are saving the environment and that this is the way forward. I do think for some of them, the intentions are I want to believe that the intentions are there, and that they do believe that they're improving the world. But the problem is they're living in such towers, that they have no understanding of food systems, of ecosystem functions, of nutrient density, of any of the things that we've been exploring in the book. And I do think that there's a huge profit incentive to this. And, you know, I can promise you that being a farmer is not very profitable, or writing about farming. And so, you know, if we can engineer perfect, you know, Jetsons food, in a way that doesn't cause any death, then, you know, why not? You know, and it's a very simplistic, easy to unpack, way. And it's also a very top-down kind of control way too. I mean, Rob and I are pretty against that kind of stuff, and really believe in sort of decentralized, food systems and, you know, more regional control. So that's just like a whole nother thing. But I think that the energy coming from Silicon Valley is very much that we know better than everybody else. We know better. We know we want to tell everyone how to eat. We're the smartest ones. This urban elite disease that they have, that is a complete devolution into disconnectedness, as Joel Salatin says in our film.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's obviously, and of course, there's a huge I mean, people in Silicon Valley don't invest in things unless they think they're going to get a huge return
Yeah.
on their investment. So there's obviously that financial incentive. And I've got a partner that is up in Silicon Valley, and we very much understand that that is what anyone cares about is ultimately making money. And you know, if you're a
Right.
business, you can't discount that. I mean, you might hopefully what you're doing at the same time that you're making money is you're also improving the world and helping people. That would be the ideal combination.
But the great thing
When
about regenerative ag, I just want to mention, Sean, is that more profit can go directly to the farmer than if they're growing crops and selling them on the commodity market. And we have an example of that in the film, of a farm that actually saved themselves, going through a program called Ranching for Profit, where they were, you know, conventional farmers, and they did feed their cattle some grain, and then they saved their farm basically. So I mean, there's a lot of organizations that are saying, you know, farm this way for the environment, but if you really want to get farmers to get on board with you, it's save your farm, make more money, leave a legacy for your family, and by the way, you're going to save the environment too. So I just want to add that in.
you know, it's particularly as I learn more, you know, I've kind of a little bit vilified these big packing companies, you know, Cargill, Tyson, JDS, Marfrig, you know, and the last two being Brazilian companies, and own a significant interest in the U.S. meat supply, and some of them been, you know, accused of pretty unsavory things, a lot of fraud and stuff like that, and you know, just shady business practices. Recently, in fact, I think I saw it today, I saw that Cargill is partnering with Burger King to restore some of the land. I don't know, you know, how to interpret that. Is that just virtue signaling? Are they really going all in that? Can we use those guys as allies in this thing? Because obviously they have the billions of dollars of resources that the average farmer doesn't. What are your thoughts on those types of things?
I think if the goal is more regenerative ag, then we absolutely have to have big business as part of the solution here. And we can't just make this the, you know, small Puritan regenerative ag movement of, you know, only selling, you know, 200 cows a year kind of thing. We absolutely need the big business involved, and at whatever level, it's a win. And, you know, hopefully it'll get bigger and bigger. I know that McDonald's is investing a ton into the space as well, and that 30% of the beef they use in Canada is grass-fed beef. And so if we can, you know, put pressure on them to let them know that this is something that consumers really care about, that we're, you know, looking to them to be leaders in this, and that it's, you know, they're going to do something if there's a demand for it. And so, yeah, it probably is a little bit responding to consumer interest, but it's also the right thing to do. You know, sometimes when these things happen, of course, you find out that it was, you know, just a PR stunt, but I want to encourage companies to, investigate this. And I'm hoping, as part of my impact strategy for the film, I'm not only going to be going to schools and universities to screen the film and do Q&As, but a big part of that is also going to be going to corporations and trying to persuade them that there is a market for this, that people care about this, and you can have a massive impact on the world. I mean, McDonald's is the largest purchaser of beef, I think, in the world. General Mills is the largest purchaser of oats in the world. If they're doing more regenerative practices, that's only a good thing.
People like Ethan Brown, who I believe is the CEO of Impossible Burger, and Pat Brown, who, and it's interesting they have the same last name. I don't think they're related, of Beyond Meat. I know Ethan Brown has said, my goal is to end animal agriculture by the year. I can't remember. I think he says 2030 or something like that.
It's some
Obviously,
stupid number.
Yeah, obviously, I don't think that's going to happen. But I mean, there are people out there that are all for that. When I look at emerging markets, particularly like China and other parts of Africa and Asia, where wealth is accumulating, the demand for meat is just going up. And I see the projections from the meat industry, and they show, positive, continued, sustained growth.
And in these countries where there's meat consumption going up, we see an increase in a decrease in stunting and an increase in test scores from kids.
I mean, it's clear, and you point to that Kenyan study that shows that, and I think there's a whole bunch of ways we can frame this argument. Yeah. Are you concerned at all that and I like to push back against this, because I think we need to, because I think there's no balance and no pushback. We could very well see, we've seen places like New York where mandatory Meatless Mondays occurring. We are seeing a bit of what I maybe hyperbolically call it brainwashing, but we do see our children being told meat is bad for you, it's bad for the environment, you shouldn't eat it, you should give it up, you should minimize it. My view is, I think very few people will accept veganism as a long-term lifestyle. There'll be a small percentage, 3% of the population, maybe as high as 5% in some places, but almost none of us are going to accept that as a long-term. But what a lot of people will say, well, we're going to cut back our meat consumption by 50% because we think it'll help the environment. Yeah. I think that's almost a worse message, because, I think it's all you're doing is further, what do you trade that out for? Well, most people are not going to trade that out for, healthy food choices, plant-based options, which may be fruits and vegetables, some would argue. Most people are going to trade that out for energy-dense, processed food. I mean, the Beyond Meats and stuff like that. And so I think the message, the flexitarian message, the just cut back on meat message, is probably more dangerous, in my view, than go completely vegan, because I don't think anybody's going to adopt that, or at least in mass numbers.
I totally agree. And I mean, even in my nutrition practice, the number one thing I do when someone walks in, if they're not ready to really go hardcore, is just jack up their protein, because they're going to be more full, they're going to feel more satiated, and they're going to reach for less junk later in the day. We know that protein is the most satiating of the macronutrients. I mean, if I tell a guy to go eat a steak, they just leave the room, run down the street and buy a steak, and they're fine. But the problem is really with women, because there's more of a bias women have against eating meat, because red meat is masculine and bloody, and death is much more visible. I mean, we kind of go into that in the book a little bit, on why women are so conditioned to not eat red meat, and so it's a little bit harder of a sell, but there's no woman walking into my nutrition practice that's even close to what I would recommend for protein alone intake, let alone red meat intake. So we've got a long way to go with all of that. And I completely agree that, this message of less meat, better meat is really, really dangerous, because it sounds so PC and perfect, but what ends up getting subbed in is even if it's beans, to get 30 calories worth of beans and rice, that's 750 calories. To get 30 grams of protein from a steak is a 3.5 ounce piece of steak. And so, and that's 200 calories. And so, to me, it's irresponsible to have so much emotion and bias in our nutrition recommendations when it should just be science. But there's organizations out there. The True Health Initiative is trying to rewrite the protein. I mean, I don't know if you've talked about that before. It's really dangerous stuff that's happening out there. And actually, Walter Willett's being investigated for his ties to that. And I hope it comes out that, anyway.
Yeah, that's David Katz's group, and I know I think Chris Gardner's are trying to redefine protein based on supposed sustainability issues, which is just an absolute joke. And we do see it, we see that in some of our search engines. You Google for high protein foods, and often meat doesn't show up until like the seventh or eighth option. It's just like, right. I mean, it's just ridiculous. One last topic before I unfortunately have to go to another interview, but chicken. We have seen a tremendous increase in chicken consumption throughout not only the U.S. and the world. Our beef consumption has dropped 30% since the 70s. Chicken consumption has gone up like 100% or even more.
400%.
400%, right? Some ridiculous amount. And I think you and I would both agree when we talk about factory farming, and I've been to feedlots with beef, and I don't think the cows look all that stressed out.
No.
There's different qualities of feedlots. And some do better than others, but they're not stuck in a cage. But chickens are stuck on top of each other. As you say, it's maybe 5 weeks to produce it. Go from chicken.
They're going to die by 6 weeks if you don't kill them first. Yes, they're a completely unnatural animal. It's disgusting. You're much more likely to get salmonella, food poisoning from a chicken than you are from eating beef. What else were you going to say?
So I was going to say, is there a way, how do we reverse that trend? I know there's ranchers say we don't want to see the chickenization of beef. And there's some people talking about, doing these indoor cattle operations. I've seen that being discussed, as, a way to do that. And I think that's obviously the wrong way to go, but how do we get away from chickens? Can we regeneratively raise chickens in mass to replace that, or do we just need to up our beef production?
Well, first of all, beef is more nutrient dense than chicken. And especially when you're looking at omega-3s, chicken's really high in omega-6, really, really high. They eat grain. And so chicken is very difficult to do in a regenerative way. We have raised meat chickens here on our farm, and we end up having to sell them for $25, $30 a bird. And, people are used to paying $3 or $4 for a chicken at, Walmart or whatever, these grocery stores. And so to raise chicken properly, you need a different breed of chicken that can handle being outside, because the Cornish cross is going to die of a heart attack if raindrop come down. Really, they're horrible animals. And anyway, so there are people, oh my God, Primal Pastures in Southern California seems to be doing it at scale pretty well. But there's not a lot of other producers that are doing really good. It's really hard to find good chicken. I don't eat a ton of chicken. I think it's just like the tofu version of meat. I think fish is a much more interesting option. And pork is a much more interesting option than chicken. I think chicken is like the bottom choice.
Diana, thank you. Like I said, I've got another meeting. This has been wonderful. I wish you guys so much success. I can't. When do you think the movie will be out?
So it's going to be available to the folks who pre-order the book by early August. So those folks will get a link when they submit their receipt by July 14th. And then as far as mainstream distribution, I'm guessing this fall. I'm still working on it.
Look forward to it. Awesome. Thank you for what you do. It's wonderful work.
Thanks.
And look forward for hearing and hopefully collaborating more together. This community is very supportive of meat regardless, but I think that's great. And you've done a wonderful service. And hopefully, like I said, I hope everyone in this community helps get the word out, because this message has to be pushed from here to the end of the earth. We're
really trying to get on the New York Times list, and it would be amazing if this book got there. It would bring a lot more press and hopefully make people question things like Meatless Mondays.
All right, tell your friends, guys. Put it on all your social media, repost on Instagram, so on and so forth. Diana, thank you. I've got to go.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day and take care.
All right, thanks, Sean.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.